HealthSouth looked like a healthcare success story. Hospitals, rehab centers, rapid growth, Wall Street confidence, and a CEO who looked like he had built a medical empire. But behind the polished numbers, prosecutors said something very different was happening. The company was not just missing expectations, it was allegedly manufacturing them. And by the time the truth came out, investigators said HealthSouth's earnings had been inflated by an estimated $2.7 billion. This is the story of HealthSouth, a company that looked healthy on the outside. But inside the books, the numbers were sick. In the 1980s and 1990s, HealthSouth became one of the most visible names in rehabilitation healthcare. The company focused on outpatient surgery, rehabilitation, and medical services. It was not selling a flashy tech product. It was not promising a new internet revolution. It was selling something that sounded stable, practical, and needed. Healthcare, recovery, rehabilitation. And that made the story even more powerful. Because investors often love companies that look like they sit inside a long-term growth trend. An aging population, more medical demand, more outpatient care, more rehabilitation services. HealthSouth seemed positioned perfectly. At the center of the story was Richard Scrushy. He was the founder, the public face, the empire builder. To many people watching from the outside, Scrushy looked like the classic aggressive founder CEO, confident, ambitious, media-friendly, and deeply tied to the company's identity. HealthSouth was not just a business, it was Scrushy's machine. And Wall Street liked machines that kept producing predictable results. That predictability became the trap. Every quarter, analysts expected numbers: revenue, earnings, growth, margins. And for a public company, missing those numbers can be brutal. The stock can fall. Investors can lose confidence. The CEO can lose credibility. So the pressure builds quietly. At first, it might look like normal corporate pressure. Work harder, cut costs, find efficiencies, close the gap. But in fraud stories, there is usually a dangerous moment. The moment when management stops asking, "How do we perform better?" and starts asking, "How do we make the numbers look better?" According to federal investigators, that is where HealthSouth crossed the line. The allegation was simple and devastating. When the company's real results were not good enough, executives allegedly adjusted the accounting to make the numbers match Wall Street expectations. Not once, not by accident, but repeatedly. Quarter after quarter, year after year, the financial statements became less like a report card and more like a script. The target came first. The accounting followed. The mechanism was not hard to understand. HealthSouth allegedly inflated earnings by recording false entries. The company could increase revenue or reduce expenses on paper. It could add fake assets. It could spread false numbers across accounts, so the fraud did not look too obvious in one place. That is what makes accounting fraud dangerous. It does not need a dramatic vault robbery. It can happen inside spreadsheets, journal entries, internal reports, adjustments that look boring from the outside. But those boring entries can change everything. They can make a weak quarter look strong. They can make a struggling company look stable. They can make Wall Street believe the business is healthier than it really is. This is the key lesson of HealthSouth. The fraud was not just about money. It was about image. The image of consistency. The image of control. The image of a company that always knew how to hit the target. That image mattered because public markets reward certainty. Investors like smooth lines. Analysts like clean beats. Executives like rising stock prices. But real businesses are messy. Revenue moves. Costs rise. Demand changes. margins tighten, and when leadership refuses to accept messy reality, the accounting can become the place where the fantasy is hidden. Inside HealthSouth, the pressure allegedly flowed downward. Senior executives knew the targets. Finance teams knew the gaps. And according to prosecutors, people inside the company helped create false entries to close those gaps. This is where corporate culture becomes dangerous, because fraud rarely survives alone. It survives when enough people stay quiet. It survives when people believe they have no choice. It survives when a bad instruction becomes normal because it happened last quarter too, then the next quarter, then the next year. Eventually, the fake number becomes part of the system. And once a fraud becomes a system, stopping it becomes harder. Because now the company is not just hiding one bad quarter, it is hiding the previous lies too. Each new false entry protects the last false entry. Each new quarter adds another layer. The fraud becomes a treadmill. If the company stops, the whole thing collapses. So the pressure does not go down. It goes up. That is why accounting fraud often gets bigger over time. The first lie creates the second lie. The second lie requires the third lie. And eventually, management is no longer running a business. They are maintaining an illusion. By the early 2000s, the environment changed. After Enron and WorldCom, regulators, auditors, investors, and law enforcement were looking much harder at corporate accounting. Sarbanes-Oxley raised the stakes for executives signing financial statements. The old world of loose corporate reporting was under pressure, and HealthSouth's internal problem was becoming harder to contain. Then the story began to break. The SEC accused HealthSouth and Scrushy of massive accounting fraud. The complaint alleged that HealthSouth had overstated earnings by at least $1.4 billion since 1999. Investigators said the false earnings were matched by false increases in assets. By the third quarter of 2002, the SEC alleged that HealthSouth's assets were overstated by at least $800 million. That matters because fake earnings do not just disappear. If a company says it earned money it did not earn, the accounting has to hide that somewhere. Often, it shows up as inflated assets. The balance sheet becomes part of the cover story. The Justice Department also moved against Scrushy. Federal prosecutors alleged that he caused HealthSouth to falsify financial statements so the company would appear more successful than it really was. The FBI later described the scheme as inflating the company's earnings by an estimated $2.7 billion. The numbers were enormous, but the pattern was familiar. A celebrated company, a powerful CEO, a market that rewarded smooth growth, and financial statements that made the business look better than reality. What makes the HealthSouth story especially interesting is what happened in court. Many executives connected to the company pleaded guilty or cooperated, but Scrushy denied wrongdoing. And in 2005, he was acquitted in the main HealthSouth accounting fraud criminal trial. That outcome made the case more complicated than a simple villain story. The company's accounting fraud was real. The government's allegations were serious. Many insiders admitted misconduct. But the founder at the center of the public narrative was found not guilty in that criminal trial. That nuance matters, because good business analysis is not just about shouting fraud. It is about understanding systems. HealthSouth shows how a company can become dependent on false performance. It shows how expectations can become control mechanisms. It shows how finance departments can become pressure valves for unrealistic leadership promises. And it shows how once the market believes a company is a smooth compounder, management may feel trapped trying to keep that image alive. The psychology of the collapse is simple. HealthSouth did not fail because healthcare was fake. The business had real facilities, real patients, real services, real revenue. That is what makes the fraud more dangerous. It was not an empty shell. It was a real company with fake numbers layered on top. And when a real business uses fake numbers, investors have a harder time seeing the danger, because there is always something real to point to. Real buildings, real employees, real customers, real operations. That reality creates cover. It makes the lie feel believable. This is one reason corporate fraud can survive for years. The fraud does not need to explain everything. It only needs to explain the gap. The gap between actual performance and promised performance. And at HealthSouth, prosecutors said that gap was filled with accounting manipulation. For investors, the warning sign is not just bad numbers. Sometimes the warning sign is numbers that look too smooth, too perfect, too consistently aligned with expectations. Real companies miss. Real companies stumble. Real companies explain problems. But when a company always seems to land exactly where Wall Street wants, the question should be simple. Is the business really that predictable? Or is someone managing the image? For executives, the lesson is even sharper. A company's culture is tested when the numbers disappoint, not when everything is going well. When the quarter is strong, integrity is easy. When the quarter is weak, integrity becomes expensive. That is when leadership has to choose. Tell the truth and absorb the pain, or protect the image and create a bigger disaster later. HealthSouth chose the path that destroyed trust. For auditors and boards, the lesson is about skepticism. Do not just ask whether the numbers tie out. Ask whether the numbers make sense. Ask who benefits from the adjustments. Ask why the company keeps hitting targets so precisely. Ask whether financial reporting is being used to communicate reality or manufacture confidence. Because once the board becomes passive, the CEO becomes too powerful. And once finance becomes afraid to challenge leadership, the accounting system becomes vulnerable. HealthSouth's collapse did not become as culturally famous as Enron. It did not become as globally explosive as Lehman. It did not become as modern and dramatic as FTX. But in some ways, that makes it more important, because it shows a quieter kind of danger, a normal-looking public company in a respectable industry with steady growth, using accounting to preserve an image. That is the part that should make people uncomfortable. The fraud did not require a strange business model. It did not require crypto. It did not require a once-in-a-century financial crisis. It required pressure, weak controls, obedient accounting, and a culture that treated Wall Street expectations like a commandment. In the end, HealthSouth survived as a business, but the old image was destroyed. The scandal forced restructuring, investigations, leadership changes, and years of reputational damage. The company that once looked like a healthcare growth machine became a case study in accounting fraud. And the lesson remains clear. A company can look healthy from the outside. It can have buildings, employees, customers, and revenue. It can have a confident CEO and a rising stock. It can have analysts who believe the story. But if the numbers are being shaped to protect the image, the company is already sick. HealthSouth was not just a fraud about fake earnings. It was a fraud about refusing to disappoint Wall Street. And once a company becomes more committed to meeting expectations than telling the truth, the financial statements stop being a mirror. They become a mask. That is how a healthcare success story became one of America's biggest accounting scandals. And that is why HealthSouth still matters. If you want more corporate collapse and financial fraud stories, subscribe to the channel and watch the next breakdown, because HealthSouth was not the only company that learned how dangerous fake numbers can become.